I'm Dr. Dave Janda. Welcome back to the Insider Insight Show. I'd like to thank you for joining me today, and thank you for subscribing to this platform, and thank you for networking the information that we provide to anyone and everyone you know. Information that the bought-off, lamestream, fake media, tentacle of the deep state will never provide to the public. Why? Because the intent of the syndicate, whatever you want to call it, the deep state, the New World Order crowd, the criminal international banking syndicate, the thugocracy, the shadow government, they're all the same. And they're all about misinforming people, disinforming people, and keeping people uninformed. Why? Because if people are uninformed, they're an easier target to have their remaining freedoms and liberty stripped. And that's the ultimate goal of these players. And we, on this platform and the independent media, are the antidote to their freedom-stripping agenda. Now, as you well know, in the Insider Insight series, I bring someone forward from behind the curtain to speak about what is happening that the public is unaware of. So today's show is a little different. I am the guest. Many people have asked that I present information on issues that I've hinted at in the past as it relates to how I originally got involved in outing the deep state, the New World Order crowd, the criminal international banking syndicate, the shadow government. And that's what we're going to devote today's show to. I think you'll find it hopefully a bit interesting. I go back to Ronald Reagan. In 1986 at a press conference, August 12th to be precise, 1986, President Reagan said at the press conference, quote, "The 9 most terrifying words in the English language are," quote, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help," end quote. Yeah, they are terrifying. Because the government, for many decades, has not been helping us, those of us who value freedom and liberty. They've been helping the syndicate. They are a tentacle of the syndicate, not just the government in the United States, but the governments around the world. And that's not a coincidence, and that is not an accident. Many people have said, Dave, you're too hard on the government. Really? How can you be too hard on cancer? Because it is a cancer. It's stripping the life out of not just every American, but every person of the world. What I do is I hold government officials accountable. I hold them to the truth. I hold them to facts. I hold them to data. Now, understand, 99.9% of people in Washington, D.C. despise me. And I'm fine with that. Too many people in our country and around the world want to be loved. Well, if you're going to be loved by those folks in D.C., then you're not part of the answer of helping people. You are part of the problem. All too many people want to please the, and I use this term loosely, leaders in government. I learned very early on in life that trying to please people in government is a road that doesn't lead to the benefit of others. I want to take you back to when my grandmother died. You've maybe heard this tangentially, this story, but I'll give you a couple of details on it. When my grandmother died, she had a wake and a funeral in the city of Chicago, where she grew up and where she had lived most of her life. And at the time of her death, the mayor of Chicago was Richard Daley, the Richard Daley. They used to call him the boss. My dad was big in the construction industry. He built very big buildings in the city of Chicago. And he had many opportunities to interact with Mayor Daley. Now, understand, my dad was a conservative. Mayor Daley was one of the top Democrats in the country. In fact, Mayor Daley threw the election along with what happened in Texas with Lyndon Baines Johnson and what happened in West Virginia. They ended up throwing the election for John F. Kennedy in 1960 over Richard Nixon. So my father and Richard J. Daley were on opposite ends of the political spectrum. But they had one thing in common. They actually wanted both to do what was right for the city. Mayor Daley, in today's terms, is a dinosaur. Because I'm unaware of any politician, career politician, who is truly dedicated to the benefit and welfare of our country, their state, their city, in most cases, even their families. They only care about themselves, and they only care about the people who put them into power, who could easily strip them of their power. And that's not the public. That's the syndicate. So at my grandmother's wake, I was pretty small at the time, Mayor Daley comes up to me. And he bends down, and he puts his face right in front of mine, and his finger right up, almost on my nose, actually, and says, "Are you Ben Janda's kid?" "Yes, sir, I am." "Do you know who I am?" "Yes, you're Mayor Daley." "Yes, right. All right. Do you want to know why I love your father?" Because he works hard?" "Well, that's part of it. He works hard. He's honest. He's truthful. And he has courage. And do you want to know why I say that, son?" Okay. "Your father will always tell me what I need to know. And it might not be what I want to hear. In fact, your father is the only person who ever told me to go F, but he said the word, go F myself, because everybody else is afraid to do that. But he felt the only way to get through to me was to use those words. And you know what? He was right. And in the process, he helped the city. If you have 1/10 the courage, the honesty, and the truthfulness of your father, and the hard work ethic of your father, you will be a success in life. You got it? Yeah. Good. Goodbye. Stands up, walks out of the room. My mom was on the other side of the room. She was across the room, didn't hear what was said. Comes up to me, she goes, "What was the mayor talking to you about, and why did he have his finger in your face?" I'm not going to tell my mom. "Hey, Mom, I said, Mayor Daley told me how much he likes Dad and working with Dad." True. But I'm not going to tell her, "Hey, Mom, Mayor Daley likes Dad because he told him to go F himself," right? I mean, anyone who knows my mom, that would not have gone over well. So she goes, "What else did he say?" I go, "No, that's really what he said." "Are you sure?" "Yeah." Said that if I was as honest and hardworking as Dad, that I would be a success in life. All right. "You sure that's all he said?" "Yeah, that's all he said." So about 10 minutes later, my mom talked to my dad, obviously. Dad comes up to me and goes, "Your mother tells me Mayor Daley was talking to you in a fairly heated fashion. What exactly did he say?" And I said, well, he told me how much he likes working with you and how much he enjoys working with you and how honest you are and hardworking and truthful. And he goes, what else did he say? He goes, well, I said, well, Dad, he said you told him to do something to himself and he thought that was really good. He goes, you're right, I did. He goes, listen to me. In life, you will undoubtedly have to deal with politicians. He goes, you know the words I used with Mayor Daley. He told you, right? I go, yeah. He goes, every politician you come in contact with for the rest of your life, buddy boy, you tell them same thing, the exact words. Okay? Always tell them what they need to know. It might not be what they want to hear. Most politicians will never do what you tell them or talk to them about because they're owned. Okay? But you can go to bed at night with a clear conscience, knowing you told them to go F themselves, and you told them the truth. So you want to know why I'm hated in Washington? It goes back to that. Because who am I to not take my dad's recommendations? No. I hold politicians and everyone in government, and frankly, everyone I come in contact with, to the truth. It's why I'm not a fan favorite amongst leadership type people, because leadership type people are all bullshit. They got there on bullshit because they're comprised of bullshit. And it's why the leaders in medicine, the leaders in law, the leaders in government, the leaders in business, they stay away from Janda. He'll let you have it. Good. The question is, how did my dad get to that point? And the question also is, what reminds me every day of that attitude? Of telling people what they need to know, and it might not be what they want to hear. And when you confront a liar, a bought-off whore of the syndicate, telling them to go F themselves. There are 3 items I want to show you today that are not only my reminder, but my inspiration, and also will make clear why I do what I do and how I do it. First item. This is a picture of the Garden City Brewery headquarters. The guy right here is my great-grandfather. The guy right here is my grandfather, my dad's dad. And the guy right here is my great-uncle Jimmy. Now, we have a show on this platform called the WTF Show. Uncle Jimmy was my favorite, not just great uncle, sorry to all them up in heaven, but probably one of my favorite relatives. He was incredibly funny. He and my dad took me to a Chicago White Sox game. They told my mom they were taking me back to the old neighborhood on the south side of Chicago. My dad and my Uncle Jimmy took me to a White Sox game when I was 1 month old. Okay. There's a whole different story about that, but the guy was absolutely hilarious. He was also incredibly talented. He was a phenomenal piano player. He played with Louis Prima, Jungle Book, Walk With Me, Talk With Me, that whole thing. He was the piano player for that. He played piano when Gene Krupa was playing drums in their group. He played occasionally with the Dorsey brothers, and he was huge. He was also a phenomenal gymnast. But my great-grandmother didn't want him involved with the music folks because they were a bad influence, and didn't want him in sports. And so he ended up being an accountant. But he was incredibly funny. And I bring this up because the WTF show is named after Uncle Jimmy, because Uncle Jimmy used to love candy, and he used to love, in particular, fudge. He would walk in a room, and he'd walk in with this huge piece of fudge, and he'd hold it up and go, "What the fudge, family?" Okay, they all knew where he was going with, but "What the fudge, family?" And this was his entrance to a room, which is why I call the WTF show the WTF show. Because it's like, what the fudge is happening here, right? Okay. So why is this picture so important? This picture I grew up with. It was on my dad's dresser. And I used to ask him when I was a little kid, "Dad, why do you have this picture, this old picture on your dresser?" And he used to say, "Dave, it's an inspiration to me and reminds me every day, because it's the first thing I see in the morning and it's the last thing I see before I go to bed, about how the government is not here to help you. They are here to undermine you and to take your freedom and your liberty and whatever money you make in life away from you." He used to tell me, "I have it on my dresser, Dave, until I'm no longer walking the planet. And then it's going on your dresser. And when you're no longer walking the planet, it's going to go on your kids' dressers. So it's the first thing they see in the morning and the last thing they remember before they go to bed." Well, why would a picture like this represent the government and them stripping freedom and liberty and your resources, financial resources from you? It goes back. It says the Garden City Brewery headquarters. The Garden City Brewery. So that guy in the apron, my great-grandfather, Vaclav Janda. And this goes back to the origins of why I do what I do, why my dad did what he did, why my grandfather did what he did. It's because of what happened with my great-grandfather. My great-grandfather, Vaclav Janda, was an incredibly talented person. His talents laid in the development of Pilsner beer. Vaclav Janda, back in the Czech Republic, back then it was called Czechoslovakia, invented what we now know as Pilsner beer when he worked for the Urkel Brewing Company in Prague. He developed a formula at 18 years of age that ultimately became Pilsner beer. The Urkel Brewery was pretty big when he started working there. It got massively bigger after he introduced his formula, of which the Urkel Brewery people networked it, not just around the country, but ultimately around the world. He was, if you will, what Tiger Woods is to golf, he was to the beer industry. And this is back in the late 1800s. Now, he did so well with the Urkel Brewing Company, they made him the youngest brewmaster in that brewery's history. And here is the second item I want to show you. It's his tasting mug. This was Vaclav Janda's tasting mug that tasted and made the first Pilsner beer in the world. He took this, it was one of the only items he brought with him to the United States. Now, why did he come to the United States? At the time, the Habsburg family a Habsburg family out of Austria. They were based in Vienna. Were, if you will, the globalists that oversaw a huge amount of land, including territory, including Czechoslovakia. A number of people had decided that they wanted autonomy from the Habsburg family. And they went to leaders in the Czech community and said, we want to, if you will, disassociate ourselves, become independent of the Habsburg family and their totalitarian rule. And so they went to political folks, and they went to celebrities. Some people involved in sports, some people involved in business. And one of the people they went to was my great-grandfather, because he was the Tiger Woods of beer, and beer is what kind of ran that country. And he became, and the family became, integrally involved in the overthrow, if you will, of the Habsburg family running the Czechoslovakia. Well, unfortunately, that operation did not go well. And the Habsburg family did not lose power. But those that opposed them were either put in prison or they were killed if they weren't caught. A number of members of my family were caught, imprisoned, and then put to death. In fact, about a decade ago, my wife and I took our daughters to Prague. And the way our family was killed after they were imprisoned, they were brought up to a tower in the castle in Prague. It was called the defenestration program. And these huge open windows were opened. They're almost ceiling to floor. They were bound, feet and hands, but not blindfolded. And they were sequentially pushed out of the window, down many stories, and died. So we took our daughters there to see what their relatives, generations before, were the last things they saw, because we took them to the same windows to look out those windows. This time the windows closed. But Václav Janda and a number of others eluded escape, and they eventually made their way to the United States. And there was a large Czech community in Chicago, which is where he ended up. He didn't know how to do anything except make really good beer. And he brought a few items with him, one of which was his tasting mug. He went around to a number of different breweries in Chicago and outside of Chicago, went as far as Milwaukee, and said, listen, this is what I've done in the Czech Republic, or Czechoslovakia. I can do that for you here. Most companies get out of here. But there was one company, the Garden City Brewery, run by an older guy, who said, all right, well, yeah, I'll give you a shot. Make up some beer, create your beer. And over a period of time, my great-grandfather did. And the owner tasted it, and he goes, holy cow. This is like great. Because it was a special blend between the hops and the barley and doing certain things with the barley and the hops. And he said, we're going with your formula. And they did. And he made my great-grandfather the chief brewmaster, the head brewmaster of Garden City Brewery. And this elder gentleman did not have any relatives, any kids. So when it came time for him to retire, he gave him a good price, on the brewery. And my great-grandfather then built the brewery and kept expanding the brewery to where it was the largest brewery in the city of Chicago. It was a city block by a city block by a city block. He kept reinvesting his money in the business. At the time, when you were running a business, he took some limited loans out with banks and savings and loans. He just didn't want to have it all in banks or all in savings and loan. He wanted to kind of diversify a bit, but he wanted to have that money, and then he would reinvest it in the business and take small loans out going across the, from a bank, from a savings loan to build the brewery, because he wanted to network, just like the model being at the Pilsner Urquell Brewery now, it was called, to do it that way, because he saw how it grew. And that's what he was doing. And things were working out quite well. That picture, the headquarters, part of it was a restaurant, and he would bring the freshest beer over there. My great-grandmother ran that restaurant right in that building here. Now, she isn't in the picture because she was the Iron Lady. That's nonsense, taking a picture. Why are you, there's no reason to do that. Work. Go back to work and quit messing around taking pictures. She was never, work. So, he builds the business. And in the early 1900s, Augie Busch from St. Louis comes to visit him and says to my great-grandfather, I want to join forces with you. Let's merge businesses. Now, Augie Busch's reputation, reportedly, was that he treated his employees poorly, as opposed to my great-grandfather, who treated employees extremely well. And according to my family, my great-grandfather felt that Augie Busch made crappy beer. So he says to Augie Busch, in his usual Janda fashion, why would I merge with you? You treat your employees terribly. I have many of your employees working for me now because they couldn't stand working for you. And number two, you make crappy beer. And why would I associate my beer with your crap? And Augie Busch reportedly told my great-grandfather, look, I have a lot of influence politically. I own, early 1900s, I own politicians in Washington and in state legislatures. And there's some bad stuff coming our way, the country's way, the economy's way. And they're going to protect me. And if you merge with me, you'll be protected too. My great-grandfather told him to go F himself. Now, rather than taking Augie Busch, the information Augie Busch brought to him and saying, okay, I got to be on the lookout and I got to maybe do some things with my business to protect myself if in case what he says is true, there's something bad coming. But he didn't. Kept investing in the business, building it bigger, moving, expansion. Okay. I bring that up because people don't realize what happened in 1907 and 1908. It was catastrophic for businesses. What happened was the savings and loan industry and the banking industry failed massively. And what happened is the United States government, we're here to protect you, came in and took over operations, in particular of the banks. Now, great-grandfather was doing fine with the business, but remember, he had those loans out. Not a lot, but some. But he had them diversified. Some banks, some savings and loan, had checking accounts and savings and loans in banks. So he had, savings and checking and okay. When the government took over the banks, what they did is they took over the loans. This goes back to what Augie Busch said was going to happen, that my great-grandfather didn't listen to. And what happened was that the banks called all of the loans in to be paid in full. Well, that's okay. My great-grandfather had stashed enough money in savings and checking accounts, in the savings and loan, and in the banks, but the banks were closed. So the government comes to my great-grandfather and says, you have a loan at this bank, you have a loan at this savings and loan. That savings and loan we're going to just leave there. But the banks, which we're really focusing on here, you have to pay that loan in full. And he said, well, I have enough money to pay for that loan in that bank that's in my checking and savings account. And they looked at him and they said, those accounts are locked. But here's my bank book, and here are the balances in my checking and savings, how much cash is there. It easily covers the loan. No, those accounts are frozen. Everybody's savings account and checking account are frozen since we took control of the bank. But the money's there. Well, it is, but it's frozen. So you have to get money from somewhere else. Well, he says, I have money in the savings and loan and the checking and savings, but it's not enough to cover that loan at the bank. But there's enough in that bank just in and of itself to cover the loan, because that's what he did. He had enough in each account to cover the loan at that. If the savings and loan, if it's there, if it's the bank. Well, because it was short, they said to him, you have till such and such a date, a week later, to get the cash in full, paid in full. And if it's not, we're taking control of your business. He tried. He took all the money out of the savings and loan, but it wasn't quite enough to cover, and it wasn't a huge amount, but to cover, even though we had all the money in the bank to cover that loan, they still wouldn't accept it. So he comes to work the day after this, and there are all these federal agents outside of the Garden City Brewery, and they're all his employees lined up all the way down the block and around the corner, not allowed in. And they're padlocking the doors. He said, we're taking your business. You didn't make your loan. He was distraught. He worked his whole life for this. Built it up. And the U.S. government came in and took his business for money that they already had in the bank that they were overseeing. And everybody's accounts are frozen, checkings and savings. He said to the federal agents, you can take my business, but you can't take my name. I want to go to my office. I got to get a couple items. One of the items he got was this. And the second item was this. His nameplate that was on his door. He went across the street, told my great-grandmother what happened, and within a day, he had a massive stroke. Was paralyzed. He lasted a very short, couple weeks, and then died from a broken heart at the hands of a government that ripped his heart out and broke it. Before he died, after he had his stroke, but before he died, he called my grandfather in. And as my grandfather was the oldest son, he said, you're going to be in charge of this family. I'm not doing well. And he goes, go to that top drawer, open it up, and there's a bag. Bring it over here. And in that bag was 30 gold coins. and a number of silver coins. And he told them, those coins will get our family through what this government is going to keep doing to the people of this country and the economy. Very soon after that conversation, my great-grandfather died. My grandfather, along with my grandmother and the two other kids, used those 30 gold coins and a number of the silver coins to get through the Depression. And they made it. That experience of what our government did back in the early 1900s is no different for what our government has been doing throughout my lifetime. You know, I started this segment with a quote from Ronald Reagan. 1988, Ronald Reagan got wind of the research I was doing in prevention that helps people. According to the federal government, prevented 1.7 million people from being injured a year, saved $2 billion in healthcare costs every year, research that I was a principal investigator for. Ronald Reagan got wind of it, brought me to Washington to work on healthcare policy with then Surgeon General C. Everett Koop. When I got to Washington, before I started working on policy, we had an introductory meeting. And one of Ronald Reagan's most trusted aides, I believe her name was Kathy, brought a few of us that were brought toward the end of his administration to work on healthcare policy and policy in general, domestic policy, into a room and said, listen, the reason why you're here is to work on policy, Janda healthcare policy, you such and such, you such and such. But understand something. Anytime you present policy to the president, it never should be based on the right-left axis. The right-left axis is theater. It's fake. It's meant to divide and conquer. It's meant to have people butting heads and to distract people. You see, your goal and objectives are to present policy to President Reagan that's based on the up-down axis. Up being freedom and down being oppression. And your goal is to create policy that promotes freedom and blocks those that want to oppress freedom. She went on, there are people in our government, many people. There are many people in industry. There are many people in the world that want to strip freedom from every person. And your role with your policy that you develop must work on the freedom side of the equation and undermine those entities that are focused on oppression. She never said deep state. She never said New World Order crowd. She never said globalist syndicate. But that's what she was talking about. And in fact, if you go back to a speech, I believe it was in 1963, Ronald Reagan was doing a campaign event for Barry Goldwater. He gave a speech, the up-down speech. And you get on your search engine of your choice. It's there. Watch it. I play it. I play a portion of it and have on the radio for years. But that presentation by President Reagan's most trusted aide reinforced everything I had heard about, whether it was from what happened in that funeral home when my grandmother passed with Mayor Daley, or whether it was the picture that I saw for many years on my dad's dresser that's now on my dresser, or looking at the mug, or looking at the nameplate. You know, the nameplate, my great-grandfather's nameplate, I have by the door when I leave the house every day so I can look at it. And it's the first thing I see when I walk in. My dad's philosophy was, when you get home in the evening, ask yourself, did I hurt the scumbags today? Did I undermine what they were up to? Did I do just a little something to make their lives of how they ruin people? Did I make their lives more difficult? And if your answer is yes, you had a great day at work. And if your answer is no, then turn yourself around and get back out that door and do something until you make their lives and their agenda hurt. And then you come home. Yeah. So, as I developed healthcare policy for President Reagan, along with Dr. Koop, the Surgeon General, at one point we presented information to President Reagan, and Dr. Koop, obviously was in charge of the presentation, said, President Reagan, this healthcare policy that we've developed focuses on individual empowerment of people, of prevention, of wellness. Understand, though, this basket of policies that's being presented to you is going to upset big insurance, big pharma, big medicine like the AMA, people in government that want to have control of people. What was Ronald Reagan's answer? I don't care about them. As long as it helps people, let's do it. That same basket of proposals and policies was brought forward to the person who followed Ronald Reagan, George H.W. Bush, whose response was drastically different. Do you know how much money we get from the insurance industry and the pharmaceutical industry and big medicine? Why would I do that? It was the same response given by Bill Clinton when several of us presented it to him and his team. And to George W. Bush. Same response. And Barack Obama, forget about it. Yeah. You see, that's why I call all those in Washington the Republicrats. Because starting with George H.W. Bush, I realized they're all the same. They're owned and operated by a criminal syndicate, the same criminal syndicate that took out my great-grandfather. And this became even more emblazoned to even the most brain-dead of people out there in the People's Republic of Ann Arbor. In 2009, when Barack Obama implemented, and remember, he's a middle-level tool of the syndicate. The top of the pyramid are the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, the Lazards, Pincuses, Warburgs, and the very top is a family called the Pessoa family. Fact, not conspiracy theory. But all these, the Bushes and the Clintons and the Obamas and the Romneys and the Pelosi's and the Schumers and the Ryans and the whatever, they're all middle-level puppets controlled by the syndicate, the banking syndicate, the same syndicate that took down my great-grandfather. And in 2009, we heard about Obamacare. And I got wind ahead of time that there was something coming. And I was told, Dave, you're the only person who has the courage to stand up to what they're about to pull. And what they're about to pull is destroying the healthcare delivery system. They're going to market it like it's going to make a big difference to the positive, but it... So when the stimulus bill came out, I started reading it. About halfway through it, around, I don't know, page 500, 600, that was maybe even a quarter of the way through it, I came upon what they were doing. That's where the rationing boards and the enforcement boards were. I went to the media because there were people at that point. There was still some semblance of truth in the media that far back, just a little. They refused to do anything with it. Well, that's when I went to the internet. And that's when I decided I have to do a radio show. I've had a lot of people coming to me and proposing me do a radio show, but the stumbling block was I had to control content. None of them wanted to have that happen. Control guests. Who was on, who wasn't. I needed full control to do a show. And if it were not for Linda Hughes and Tyrone Hughes at Wham Talk 1600, probably never gotten a shot. But I did there because they said, well, whatever. Sure, you have control of it. You do it. And that's where we took the show from, with the power of the internet, to all 50 states and over 120 countries worldwide and people that listen to the show. But we outlined what Obamacare was about, that it was the most unethical and inhumane means of cutting health care costs because it was based on the rationing and denying of care by bureaucrats who had no functional medical knowledge. R's and T's didn't want to hear about it. But we kept pushing. We kept educating and empowering people so they knew what was coming. And we were making a big headroad and inroads. And then we had Judas Roberts on June 28th, 2012. Lead a 5-4 decision. He actually flipped his vote. Why? Because he's owned by the syndicate. They pulled his string, and he flipped his vote. Because he had written, actually, for the majority side, that Obamacare was going to be found to be unconstitutional, which it is. But he rewrote the law because he's controlled. One of the things I found out, as I mentioned before, when I was working on policy, was that at the time, as early as 1989, when I asked a very, very famous politician as we were walking out of the White House, I asked the simple question: what percentage of people in this city, in Congress, their aides, the lobbyists, everybody associated in this city, what percentage of them are owned by the syndicate? He looked at me straight on, without a hesitation, said 95%, Dave. If that person was alive today, and we were walking outside of the White House and I asked him that same question, I believe he'd say 99.9%. Because I believe that's what it is. They're all owned and operated by the syndicate. So we took on Obamacare because it was right to take it on behalf of the public. Look, let's give Obama credit. Healthcare reform was needed. I was trying to push that on Capitol Hill for years. It started back in 1988 with C. Everett Koop and Ronald Reagan. But no one, the Bushes, the Clintons, none of them really wanted true healthcare reform. Donald Trump did a little bit of what we had suggested 30 years before, but there was many other pieces to the puzzle he could have implemented and did not. Why? The tentacles of the insurance industry, big medicine, big pharma. And we saw how Trump cozied up to big pharma, didn't we, in the end? You might not want to hear that. But it's true. Right. He had an opportunity to tell big pharma, big medicine, big insurance, big government to go F themselves. Instead, yeah. 1.3 million people injured and counting. Tip of the iceberg, according to the CDC. Tip of the iceberg. 30,000 people dead because of this. Right. I saw something coming when Roberts push that decision. And I decided this is exactly what happened to my great-grandfather. Augie Bush gave my great-grandfather a heads up, and he didn't take it. He didn't act upon it. I was not going to repeat the mistakes of my great-grandfather. So what did I do? When this decision came through from Roberts, I decided I was going to up my game. That I was going to expand the reach of Operation Freedom, of our policy initiatives, of the guests that I bring forward. We expanded the reach of Operation Freedom from a radio show to a YouTube channel, to a Rumble channel, to an Odyssey channel. We expanded the reach of the content. We expanded the reach of the guests. And then I told my partners in the fall of 2014, I didn't like what was coming. Something big was coming. I didn't know what. I didn't know it was going to be the pathogen. But I knew something big was coming because at the heart of Obamacare was about controlling healthcare delivery and making it so that there would be no solo practice or group practice in the United States, that all doctors would be owned by insurance companies or big health conglomerates, and they would be told based on protocols developed by bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. that had no functional medical knowledge, and that includes that little F. Fauci. How many people did that guy ever treat in his career? Huh? How many do you think? My guess? Less than 10. Less than 10. He's a rat in an office. But boy, he sure had the protocols that killed people with his remdesivir. And before that, with AIDS. With his AZT program. Look it up. It's a mass murder. That's being kind. He's everything. He is everything I have worked against in my entire career. And anyone who signs on to that little shit, God help you. Because you're going to end up where he is if you sign on to his program. So I announced I was going to retire January 1st, 2017. Everybody's like, what are you doing that for? Your hands are still good? You do really good surgery? You take good care of people? No. Because when you read Obamacare, starting in January of 2017, that's when the control is handed over to these bureaucrats that are unaccountable and unelected, to these bureaucrats that have no functional medical knowledge. And that's not how I was trained, and that's not how I take care of patients. I am going to fight this war from a different perch, and that perch is from the Operation Freedom perch. People say, why are you doing this? You want to know why I'm doing this? Right here. Because I wasn't going to ignore what happened to that guy in an apron. I was going to fight. I was going to keep telling these people to go F themselves. I was going to hold their feet to the fire. And that's what I've done. And that's what I will continue to do. George Washington said it best. I will die on my feet before I'll live on my knees. Well, I'm not going to die from a stroke because I let the government pound me in the ground. I'm dying on my feet. Fact. And I'm holding every one of those scumbags accountable to the last breath I take. Why? This picture. This mug. And this nameplate. To ignore these three things is not only a disservice to Václav Janda, not only a disservice to my family, it's a disservice to our country. It's a disservice to God. Fact. I thank you for joining me today. Until next time, Dave Janda signing off. My dad's favorite statement. Dream big and dare to fail. Thanks for your time today.